The city of Chicago has seen another horrific weekend of violence. At least 40 people were shot, 7 killed. The victims include a 7-year-old girl shot in the head who was later pronounced dead, a 1-year-old boy shot twice in the abdomen and taken to hospital in a critical condition, and an 8-year-old boy also shot in the abdomen and left with critical injuries. If this was a school shooting, the left media would be all over it. The Democrats would dissent, but this violence in cities like Chicago is largely ignored. 40 shot and 7 killed in one weekend. What can be done? Adam B. Coleman is the author of Black Victim to Black Victor and the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. He joins me now. Adam, what can be done? Tougher gun laws don't seem to be the answer here. From what I understand, Chicago has some of the toughest gun laws in America.
No, you're absolutely correct. Chicago has one of the toughest gun law measures in the country, and yet they have a major gun crime issue. It doesn't seem to be working, but they're not going to reverse course because it's one party dominated within the city. But to go back to what you were saying, if this was a school shooting, people would care. The reality is that when Black people die within inner cities, it's not an emergency, right? When we get a flood of illegal immigrants coming into the country, then it's an emergency. Then all of a sudden they have resources to fix the problem or at least mitigate the problem. But this just becomes normal. Every year, as soon as the weather starts getting a little bit warmer, especially in the summertime, it just becomes a death zone within Chicago. And everybody knows this, everybody expects it. And things have only gotten worse, surprisingly.
Now, disgraced sporting icon and actor O.J. Simpson died of cancer last week. He was aged 76. If you ask me, he should have died in jail. But his trial of the century for the double homicide of his former wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman, is being remembered as a pivotal moment in American race relations. Since his acquittal, jury members have openly admitted his not guilty verdict was a payback for Black injustices as they saw it. Let's have a look.
Do you think that they're members of the jury that voted to acquit OJ because of Rodney King?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
How many of you think felt that way?
Oh, probably 90% of us.
Nearly 20 years on from that infamous trial, his acquittal is still being celebrated as a win for Black people by some people, although I've got to say some academics aren't covering themselves in glory. Professor Mark Lamont Hill, his tweet about this issue caused great waves. He wrote, O.J. Simpson was an abusive liar who abandoned his community long before he killed 2 people in cold blood. His acquittal for murder was the correct and necessary result of a racist criminal legal system. What do you make of that? He acknowledges he was a murderer, he was a monster, he slaughtered 2 people, but he also sees the acquittal as correct and necessary because the criminal justice system is racist in his eyes.
Yeah, this is one of those examples where ideology makes smart people say dumb things. And what he is saying is essentially that justice isn't really the objective. The objective is to adhere to the ideology. The ideology says, no matter what the circumstance, O.J. Simpson, even though he abandoned his community, according to his statement, he is always a Black man within a white racist society, and he's going up against a white supremacist criminal justice system. So the right measure is to always find him not guilty. This is the type of inconsistency that we see when we try to apply logic. But if you apply ideology, it's very consistent. They believe that O.J. Simpson somehow or other must be considered a martyr in their cause, even though OJ didn't technically want to be some sort of martyr. He played the card, right, because it benefited him. He was fighting for his life, right, fighting for his freedom. So it doesn't shock me that other people took hold of that. But yeah, Mark Lamont is what he is saying does not shock me whatsoever because he's an ideologue.
He is. Every now and then he says something sensible, but, you know, as they say, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Now, let's talk about this new gender-neutral word that has been created to describe Latino people. We had Latinx or Latinxes. That was the previous word that was tried to be employed, and it got mocked. And Latin people seem to absolutely hate it. The Hispanic community did not embrace that word at all. Now they've come up with a new one called Latin. Do you think this one is going to be embraced if they replace the X with an E?
No. I mean, see, the big problem is that, and this is being pushed by the media, the big problem that the media has is that they have an elitist problem and they have an ideology problem. And often those two things mix. And so what we're seeing here is the media pushing something that adheres to the ideology, right? Makes the non-conforming, gender non-conforming people feel comfortable, when in reality, it makes 99% of the population squirm. Like, this is ridiculous, it's absurd, and no one asked for it except for the ideologues. So this is rightfully being mocked, just like Latinx was rightfully being mocked. And honestly, anybody who is saying Latinx or even saying this, what they're trying to do is signal to each other. You know, they're letting them know, I'm part of the tribe. I know the language, I know the lingo. And that's how you spot these people.
Well, yes, and I think it's going to be the same thing. It will be some very affluent white folk who'll be using this term, and everyone else will continue to mock it. Now, let's talk about voter ID. It's incredible to me that this is such a ongoing issue in the US. You would just think it would be obvious for everyone to have ID if they're going to participate in the electoral process. You need ID to pretty much do anything these days. The Republicans have issued new legislation to help combat voter fraud in the lead up to the presidential election.
And so what we're going to do is introduce legislation to require that every single person who registers to vote in a federal election must prove that they're an American citizen first. They have to prove it. That will be a new part of the federal law, and a very important one. Our bill will establish new safeguards. It'll put us on par, by the way, with virtually every other democracy around the world that also prohibits non-citizen voting.
Adam, as usual, the response to this has been somewhat demented from some in the media, some of the pundits. All they see here is racism and voter suppression, that, you know, non-citizen voting isn't an issue. I mean, if it isn't an issue, then what's the problem with having voter ID? And they're also claiming that anybody who thinks this is an issue is a conspiracy theorist. Is that how you see it?
No, not at all. And calling us conspiracy theorists is the gaslighting, because in New York City, they just lost an appeal to allow non-citizens to vote. Mayor Eric Adams and the city council pushed for non-citizens to vote within New York City. Now, to be specific, they wanted permanent residents, right? So they're here legally. However, voting is for citizens, right? That is our right. That's one of the things that makes it special about being a US citizen. You have the right to have your voice heard when it comes to picking your representative. And what they tried to do was bogart our system, violate the Constitution, which the appellate court said this is unconstitutional. They tried to violate it so they can get 800,000 more people as voters within New York City. And if that was to go through, then you would have seen ripples throughout other major cities to push for the same thing. So thankfully, in this circumstance, the court clearly saw that this is unconstitutional. If you're not a citizen of the country, you should not be able to vote. But when people say, oh, this is not a non-issue whatsoever, no one's actually trying to vote. First off, this is the most common sense thing in the world. If you are a citizen, then you should be able to vote. If you're a non-citizen, you should not be able to vote. And being able to prove it is the most common sense thing all around the world, especially in Western democracies.
Well said, Adam B. Coleman. And for more of Adam's work, you can visit adambcoleman.subtrack.com. And also, New York Post publishes your fantastic columns. Always enjoy those. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.